I'm Jim Roberts, the host of Senior Living in Alexandria. We're pleased to be back this month with another informative show for seniors, but not just seniors, but families, friends, caregivers, all those people that worry about and take care of and love seniors in Alexandria. We've got a special treat for you. We're going to do a three-part series. I'm really pleased Mark Fries was here from Merrill Lynch, was here last summer. We did a wonderful series on finance, but he's going to help us on a three-part series in July, August, and September, so be sure and tune in for all of those. Today's section, we're going to be talking about advanced preparation, and then in August, we'll have a session on assessing your situation, building a team, and third will be implementation. Joining us for this section is Dan Ruttenberg. He's an attorney at SmolenPlevy, and we're going to talk about some of the important legal aspects of retirement and senior living. So, Mark, let's start with you. How about tell us what are the important stages as we're doing life planning? What's important?
So the first thing is to figure out where you're starting from. So kind of assess where you are, maybe where you want to go in retirement, how much it's going to cost. And so I always describe at the beginning of your stage of life, you're accumulating assets, and then you're going to assess, you're going to get the assets, start using them, and then eventually you're going to distribute them to your family. So those are all three important parts, and legal has a lot to do with all three of those parts.
What are the factors? I mean, you accumulate those at stages. That makes sense. But how do you do that?
Well, the first part is to make sure, do you know what you need to do? So how long is it going to take? How long you want to be in retirement? How long are you going to live in retirement? All the things that come before that, putting your kids through school, buying their vacation home, all things like that. So that's what we look at is how long is it going to take before you need the money, and then how do you make sure you accumulate the right amount of money to make sure that all that happens.
So what are the factors in making those choices? What sorts of things do you have to look at?
So the first part is the investments. Where are you going to put the money?
Stocks, bonds, real
estate, things like that. The environment right now is very unusual. Last time we talked in the summer, interest rates were a lot higher than they are right now. So for seniors, one of the most difficult things is you're not earning very much. If you have a CD or a money market account or a treasury bill, you're earning probably less than 1%. So how do you make sure your assets are still staying ahead? And there's some solutions to that. A lot of those are dividend-oriented type solutions where there's paying income regardless of what the stock market does. So those are some of the solutions.
And obviously, building that portfolio of assets, you need some help or care or advice?
I would say you would need some advice. 85% of people that try to do it on their own are not successful or don't do as well as the market does. So as I talk to clients every day, one of the things I mention is that you need to make sure if you have money in the stock market, it should be doing at least as well as the stock market is doing. And there are some low-cost ways to do that. Part of it, when we have conversations with clients, is index-based. So that would be kind of a broad-based array of stocks that they'd be able to own in certain categories to make sure those are focused towards reaching their goals.
Okay. Let's turn to a legal question. Dan, who's responsible if you need help? So we've got a good plan going, or at least you're getting prepared to do that during your living years as a family, but how do you begin to get the legal side of it going?
Well, I would say that starting of appointing people as to who's going to be in charge really stems from what are the appropriate documents to have in place.
Okay.
And what you're looking at there, legal documents are tools, and they're tools to address issues, and there are a lot of common issues that everyone has. So you might be everyone wants to direct where things go at death. A lot of people think of that as estate planning. But there's a lot more. There's issues with your children. You have sudden wealth issues, maybe creditor protection issues. You want to make sure you're doing estate tax planning. You want to avoid the estate tax if you can, if you're in a taxable estate situation. You want to give good access to the assets in the event of a disability. Everyone runs that same risk. You want to avoid probate. You want to make sure that you have expressed your desires with regard to medical decisions. So different documents, sometimes you need more than one document to address an issue. Generally, the centerpiece on any one of those documents is going to be a revocable living trust. For seniors in particular, a revocable living trust handles most of those duties. It will direct where you want your assets to go. You can do tax planning in a revocable living trust. You can put provisions in for your children in a revocable living trust. A revocable living trust, if your assets are in a revocable living trust, when you die, you don't have to go through the probate process, which is an arduous process. And it also gives you the best access, or someone who you want to appoint, the best access to your assets in the event of a disability. So you have to start there. And from there, you would then say, okay, well, who do I want to appoint? A lot of people think, hey, I want to appoint an executor, or I want to appoint a trustee, or an agent, or something along those lines. But really what you got to think about is, what is the role I'm asking this person to do? Am I asking someone to make medical decisions for me? Okay, well, that role is with the medical power of attorney or an advanced medical directive. And so finally, to get to answering your question, I would say an advanced medical directive, or with regard to that role in particular, a lot of people choose their family members. A lot of people will, if you're younger, you start with your parents maybe. Spouses are often there. Children come into play. I would caution people from naming someone that's too young. That's a really heavy burden to put on somebody, saying, pull the plug for mom and dad. Someone who happens to be 18 or 19, now most seniors, your kids are going to be older than that, but you do want to make sure that someone's at least old enough and responsible enough to make that kind of decision. That's a lot of weight. And then if you have no one, there are services, there are people that are willing to take on that role for you.
Okay. Let me go back to a really basic question we kind of skipped over. If you don't have a revocable living trust, you don't have a medical directive, you don't have a power of attorney, basic will. What happens if you don't have a will?
Well,
I suspect some of our folks may not have gotten that far.
Okay. If you have no estate plan in place,
Right.
What happens depends. If you're talking death, you're talking disability. In the event of death, there's some things that will go by way of beneficiary designation. So if you have a life insurance policy, it's got a beneficiary designation, you are directing where that goes.
Okay.
Same thing with the retirement account. But assets that don't have any instructions built into them, those you lose say on. So basically the state has default laws, they're called the laws of intestacy, and they're going to go to basically your closest relatives. And so that just happens.
So if you have no will, there's a provision in state law, but it's up to the state to determine how your assets would be dealt with,
Yes.
in
Now-
spite of anything else you might do.
Now that's not the big problem. The big problem is the hassle, the cost, the delays associated with the probate process. It is a lot. We have a very profitable probate department in my law firm for people that don't do planning, as opposed to the people that do planning where we don't, it just goes very smoothly.
What's an estimate, roughly, of the cost and time? I know there's not a single answer, but what's the range of what people might expect in terms of probate and cost and time?
It's there's a lot of things. So like when I do estate planning for people, I can give them a very good estimate on that.
Okay.
The one thing I've learned with estate planning, or not estate planning, but estate administration after the fact, is that everyone's different. And if you've got fights among the beneficiaries, we have people that spend way more money than anyone should because they're fighting. I've run into scenarios of people who have been hoarders, and that can add all kinds of things. Everyone's life is different, and there's all kinds of things that go on. And when you don't do planning, what happens is we don't even know where the assets are. So now that's a whole mystery. You've got to figure out where things are. And it used to be you'd sit at home and wait for statements to arrive. Well, you can't necessarily do that anymore. Everything's online.
Right,
It can be very hard to find things.
You've got to find passwords, if nothing else.
Yes.
What's the shortest, in your experience, what's the shortest probate you've ever had to deal with?
Well, the best I just had one this week. Someone came in, it's interesting because someone came in and they were, the husband died, and the child and the wife were just terrified of what to expect. They just had no idea. And we had a meeting, and Dad took care of everything properly. He utilized some tools like a revocable living trust, and we don't probate at all. So the shortest probate is a 0 probate,
That sounds great.
and everything just moved very smoothly.
Next question, what's the longest, roughly?
Oh, years. Years
Kinda
upon
come-
years.
Depending on lawsuits among heirs and et cetera.
Yeah, when you get into lawsuits, and we've had sometimes ones with businesses in them, they can get very, very complicated.
Okay.
And I will say that even when things run smoothly, there are some things that are going to take time, like tax returns. Sometimes it's a hurry up and then wait. You have to just wait a little bit before you can get certain things done.
Okay.
The other thing is disability. If you have no planning in disability, that is a very not dangerous scenario. It's a very cumbersome scenario. Basically, you find yourself in a conservatorship situation, which means you have to report all your assets into the court. Every penny in gets reported, every penny out gets reported, goes on for the rest of your life. It's public record. Courts get to say over what you spend your money on. They generally need to be educated if you're trying to do gifting to the grandkids. So you really want to avoid a conservatorship if you can. And that's scarier than a probate.
We're going to have to go to a break. So on that note, on that optimistic note, we're going to go to a break and we'll come back. And when we come back, we're going to see a little bit more on the investment side and how to preserve the assets that might be, as Dan outlined, a little bit at threat if you don't take the proper steps. So we'll come back in just a moment. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Mary Lee Anderson, Executive Director of Senior Services of Alexandria. I'm here to tell you what's happening in Alexandria in the month of July. There's all kinds of great free activities this month. We're going to kick off the month at Orinoco Bay Park on July the 9th with a celebration of America's 240th anniversary. There'll be fireworks, you'll be sitting along the Potomac River enjoying great food, and have a concert too by the symphony. So I hope to see you at Orinoco Bay Park on the 9th of July. Another free offering is by the Beatley Library. You can come over to the Beatley Library on July the 12th in the afternoon from 2 to 4, and they'll train you on how you can download ebooks and all kinds of materials from the library for free. So you can really put that Kindle to good use and have a free book to read for, I think you get it for up to 3 weeks at no cost. So come by Beatley Library on July the 12th and hear all about it. Another free activity is sponsored by Alexandria's Department of Parks and Recreation. You can come over to the Mount Vernon Rec Center on Friday evenings and play all kinds of fun games. It's a throwback to family game night. It's free. You can come enjoy hanging out with other seniors in a lovely atmosphere. Maybe stop by and have dinner in Delray afterwards. So be sure to stop by the Mount Vernon Rec Center Fridays from 7 to 9 o'clock. A wonderful activity that's happening beginning July 23rd, a little later in the month, and running through August 6th, is the Little Theater of Alexandria's production of West Side Story. It's a classic play or classic musical, and I'm sure it will be a wonderful production, as are all of their productions. You can find out more buying tickets online at littletheater.com or by calling 703-683-0496. And finally, the good news is that we have opened up registration for the Senior Academy. You may remember last year in September we offered the first annual Senior Academy, and that's where seniors can come and sign up for 4 classes each Wednesday morning from 10 to 12. We'll learn about how our city works, meet some of our city's top leaders, and also find out about programs and services that are available for seniors. Where registration is limited to just 25 people, so be sure to call our office at 703-836-4414, extension 110, or go to our website, www.seniorservicesalex.org, to find out more about the Senior Academy. Those are just a few of the things happening in July, and I hope to see you at all of them. Bye-bye.
Well, we're back. I'm here with Mark Fries and Dan Ruttenberg, and we're talking about, of all things, advanced preparation for retirement and for estate planning. Mark, let me address you. How much might you need for retirement? You talked about these classes of assets. How much do you need, and what categories of things?
That's the hardest question for most people. How much do you really need? And so there is a math answer, which is basically for every $1 million in assets that you have, you're able to generate about 5%. So that's about $50,000 a year.
Okay.
So if somebody has $100,000 they're trying to replace, they need a couple $1 million in assets. But that's based upon having the money invested the right way, having things that are low cost, which you talked about earlier, having it in potentially, I would recommend indexes, which would be less expensive, and then making sure you have all your liabilities covered. So Dan talked a little bit about it. Healthcare is a big liability for people.
Yes.
So I have you all taken care of and everything's going to be fine and you're going to go into retirement, we have plenty of money aside, and all of a sudden somebody gets sick. So how do you make sure that liability is not there? And there are some insurance policies that might cover that. Long-term care would be one option, or you might be able to do it privately if you have enough assets to be able to do that. Or if you're in a category where you don't have enough assets, then there might be government assistance programs like Medicaid that would cover that.
Okay. And how do people, so I suppose that's you try to do it during your life. Maybe you have a retirement plan that has coverage, but try to look in advance. Don't wait until
Yeah,
these events.
don't wait. I mean, my mom used to tell me the power of compounding, which we've all heard. So start early. The earlier you start, the less you're going to have to save in the future.
Okay.
And so we try to make sure that people get there early and start
Where-
thinking about it.
How about Social Security? Where does that fit in?
So that'd be one of the income pieces coming in. So Social Security might be coming in. You might have a traditional pension coming in. And then the rest of it's going to come from your asset base, which is kind of this 5% withdrawal rate we're talking about.
Which could be from inheritance or from earnings during your life that have accumulated, and then assets that have appreciated,
all
valuable
of
real
those.
estate or stocks and bonds or whatever, and then the combination of all of that. What about withdrawal rates? What are withdrawal rates?
So withdrawal rates would be how much you can take out of that asset base. So you have your Social Security as one piece, you have your pension as another piece, and then you have whatever those asset base is. So we talked about a 5% withdrawal rate as something that's comfortable to
Pretty
take out.
standard.
Standard, and will last through lots of different types of markets, and will also give you enough hedge to kind of keep ahead of inflation. So somewhere between 4 to 5% is a comfortable, long-term, sustainable withdrawal rate.
I suppose in simple math that would equal 20 years of withdrawals until you get to zero, but
Well,
it
we don't
doesn't
want you to
work
be
that way.
zero.
No, we
And
don't.
hopefully it'd be something left over so Dan can come in and do the legal part, or somebody
Okay.
like Dan, and talk about where those assets go.
What about taxes? What kinds of, can you avoid taxes? Are there income taxes? What kinds of things can you anticipate, I guess is the right word, not enjoy?
So obviously when you're accumulating the assets, you're trying to keep the IRS away from them as much as possible. So one of the things you can do is participate in a retirement program. Most people are familiar with a 401k or a 403b, which would be for a nonprofit. So those plans are all deferred from taxes, and the assets grow tax deferred until you start drawing the money out. And then they're taxed to you once you draw the money out. Hopefully at that point you're in a lower tax bracket. So that's one direction to go. There are investments that are tax-free. So if you support your local state or municipality, they're called municipal bonds.
Okay.
And those will give you income that's totally free from taxes. And there are a lot of other type of vehicles that are available too that give you some tax incentives. So we would sit down with somebody that's in a high tax bracket and talk about that, and work in conjunction with their accountant and their attorney to figure out what the best choices are.
Now, that would be tax planning and savings during your lifetime. How about once you're deceased?
So that really comes down to a lot of legal part, which Dan would talk about. So how do you make sure you're preserving as much as possible? How do you avoid probate, which Dan alluded to? How do you make sure that you don't have a lot of estate tax going out because of local estate taxes? So part of that is figuring out how you're going to pass the assets on to the next generation. And then as Dan kind of alluded to, who are you passing it on to? Are they really good with money or not? If they're not good with money, then you need to put some legal documents in place to make sure it's passed on the right way and you're protecting your child. I would kind of call it the safety net underneath them to make sure they're going to be okay.
And if I could just jump in for a second there. One of the interesting changes, because of changes to the estate tax laws, which you're sort of alluding to, is planning used to always be based upon avoiding the estate tax. And with the changes and more favorable changes to the estate tax law, you now really need to take into account income taxes when doing that planning. It is not all about avoiding the estate tax. It is a consideration that you need to take into account, but sometimes people do that when they're not facing an estate tax and they ultimately cost themselves or their heirs more in income taxes. The big difference is something referred to as a step up in basis when you die. So if you buy a share of stock in McDonald's for $10, you sell it for $100, you got to pay capital gains. And if you give it to your kids while you're alive and they sell it, they've got to pay $90 in capital gains. But if you leave it to your children, they can turn around the next day and sell it and not have any gain.
The day that you would die, that value then is stepped up to the $100 in your example?
Yes.
And so you've avoided all those capital gains that they may have to pay and that you might, okay. So
Yeah.
that's, again, part of a really careful tax plan in order to be able to, I don't think any of us can predict the exact day when those events occur, but you can do the best you can to anticipate it.
But if you've done estate tax planning and you did it a while ago, you really should have that reviewed. I mean, you should always have your estate plan reviewed periodically anyways, but you really want to have it reviewed for that issue because there's been some significant changes to the estate tax laws.
You mentioned state taxes, but how about federal inheritance tax?
So
or
I'm
estate
saying
taxes?
estate tax. So there's a federal estate tax,
Oh, okay,
and there
I'm
are,
sorry.
depending on the state you live in, state estate tax, or where you own real estate. Virginia, though, great place to die. They got rid of the estate tax. So there's
A
no...
great place to die. Okay.
As far as taxes are concerned. I mean, the tax is high too. So on an estate tax, it can be as high, it starts at 40%. So that's a lot of money that's not
In the
going
state of Virginia.
in
that's
the
a federal
the
tax
federal
you start.
tax.
Oh,
The
okay,
federal
I'm sorry.
tax starts at 40%. So if you're trying to make sure you're passing money on to the next generation, you want to make sure you've done the right financial planning and the right legal planning and the right tax planning, and they all go hand in hand. So you need to have an advising team that's looking at all three of those.
Okay.
Hopefully Mark got you all the money, so now you have an estate tax problem.
That's a nice, actually, I suppose that's, even though it's taxes, you want to be in that situation. It's worse
It's a
not
good
to
problem
be.
to have.
Right. So tell us some legal mistakes that people make. Since we're
Most
covering-
common legal mistakes in sort of the planning is if you have a revocable trust, not properly funding it. And people who are not guided through this properly, if you've done like online planning or something, so common you haven't gone through and made sure that your asset titles and your beneficiary designations match your plan, because you can completely mess that up. And we're going to go into more detail in that in a later section about implementation.
Later this summer. Correct me if there's my impression is when you say funding a trust, that means basically titling. It's like a second person. You're turning it over to a trust or a trustee or another person. That person is in a different tax situation than you would be personally.
Not exactly. When you're dealing with a revocable living trust,
Okay.
you're the trustee as long as you're alive and competent. You're the beneficiary. And so the IRS, because you can do whatever you want, they don't even want to know about it. So the tax ID number for a revocable trust is your Social Security number. So it's completely transparent from that standpoint. So when you put something in a revocable living trust, you're not giving someone else your assets. You're really giving yourself the assets, but from a state law standpoint, there's a lot of benefits that come into play. The avoiding the probate, giving
Okay.
access in the event of a disability.
Okay. You in terms of other planning online, is that a consideration? How do you do that?
I am not a fan of the online planning because what I find every time is it gives people a false sense of security, so they don't actually seek the proper planning that they need, and they've never done it properly. They don't know how to do the assets properly. It is a complex thing. You need to sit down, not just with your attorney. The financial advisor should be involved as well. You really need to go through and make sure everyone is on your team is on that same page as you go through and title these things. And you can't be expected to know how to do that as an individual. It is complex, and you do need to be guided through it.
I'll ask you, we're running short of time, but I'm tempted to ask this. You got the case of the guy has had 3 marriages. He's had children in each of the marriages, and he comes into you two, and you're trying to give him advice. Where do you start and what do you do? How do you sort that out?
The first thing I'd ask him is where do you want the money to go? And who's important in your life? And as Dan alluded to, some of these questions you can't get online because you're going to ask about their children, if he has children. Are all the kids okay? Are all the kids able to handle money? Are all the kids' marriages okay? And I always describe a trust as I don't trust what you're going to do with the money. So I'm going to make sure I draw something out to make sure it happens the right way and that family is protected because they've done the right documentation.
If absent a trust or even a will, then all of those would be contenders or have a claim in whatever assets there might be. And that hopefully would not be contentious, but it easily could be.
Well, I've done this for almost 30 years, and money breeds a lot of problems.
I see.
And so I would tell you after doing it for a long, long time that there's always some little issue with something. And then if you get a lawyer involved, it costs more money if they have to go to court about it. And it can all be avoided if you sat down with a financial advisor or your accountant or your lawyer and got it done at the beginning. I mean, I do financial planning, but on top of every one of my reviews is a little L for legal, saying you need to think about the legal part and tell me about your family, what you really want to happen with this money.
So it's not preserving assets, it's not about avoiding taxes, it equally would be so that your desires in future life relative to your family can be expressed, made known, and hopefully not a source of contention.
Yeah, and then some might be just, what's your legacy?
Yeah.
I mean, what message you want to leave behind when you're gone? So some might be philanthropic. So if you have, we have a lot of wealthy clients, so they might have 15 or 20, $30 million. So their kids don't need all that, in their opinion. So what else are you going to do with it?
And there's mechanisms for that, tools that can be used
There are
for that kind of
mechanisms for
planning?
that. There's some significant tax benefits they could get in their lifetime for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
They could empower their children to get involved in philanthropy, as an example. All
Okay.
kinds of choices.
And I'll give you the quick, don't do this, because that's the exact thing I see all the time. Someone has put their child on their major bank account to assist them with disability, and they've got 5 children, 3 from different marriages, and they don't realize that that will direct where assets go, and the kids from one marriage are not necessarily going to want to share with kids from the other marriage. There can be gift tax
Sure.
consequences. It's a mess. So you really don't want, you want to make sure that you've done your planning and not leave it up to the laws that might be in place and that vary from state to state.
We're running out of time, but you know what? You've led right into the next month's segment, which is assessing the situation and then building a team to do that. So we'll continue this next. Thank you very much for this session. It's been very informative. I'm sure there's a lot of questions. They will let you folks know how to get in touch with you for further questions. But thank you for this, and we'll come back next month and talk about how to get into these situations and what to do about it. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Thank you.